All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our webinar this evening. We're going to go ahead and get started so we can keep on time and honor your time. So our topic tonight is executive function, the essential skills for juggling thoughts, actions, and emotions. And I'm Kelly Spino. I am the Chief Organizational Learning Officer for the Children's Guild. And with me this evening
is Angelique McCoy, Talent Development Coordinator at the Children's Guild and a licensed therapist in Maryland. So what we like to do for those who are joining us for the first time this evening is kind of set the stage. And for those who have joined us in months past, we will definitely be reminding you of our webinar norms per se. First and foremost, we want to let you know that this particular workshop is being recorded. So don't worry, you will be able to grab these nuggets and tidbits later on in a couple of weeks or so, and we'll definitely let you know when it is available. We would love that, just for engagement's sake, if you are available to turn on your cameras and just be present, whichever way you feel most comfortable, we'd love that. It makes it a lot easier for the presenter to be able to actually see the faces that we're talking to. But of course, we understand we are all home or we're elsewhere in different places. And so we want you to be as comfortable as possible so that we can really have an engaging learning environment. We will ask that you mute your audio so that there's no background noise as the speakers are presenting, and so that we can hear each other really swiftly and clearly. And we just want you to be engaged. We're going to be using the chat function. We have a couple of activities that we'll be sharing throughout the presentation for us really to get together and learn this information and grow together. So be ready to learn some new things, and let's have some fun.
All right, so let's get started. Today's topic is executive function. So we're going to provide an overview today of what exactly we're talking about when we say executive function. So let's get started. I want you to take a moment and really take in this picture. March 13th, 2020. I want you to feel the movement in the picture, the tones, the messages or the feelings being conveyed. And think about where you were on March 13th, 2020, when we all got the news that everything was shutting down. So now it's time to get you engaged a little bit. We're going to create a word cloud. And for those of you who have not done this, we'll walk you through it. So what we want you to do is think about one word that comes to mind as you thought about that day in time and how you were feeling. And so in the chat box, you will find a link. You'll click on the link and it will actually take you to another screen. It'll take you to what's called a Mentimeter. What we want you to do is type in your answer of what were you feeling at that time. Then you're going to click the submit button and come on back here and let's see how we were all feeling at that point in time.
Looks like some folks are already responding in the chat, Kelly, and they were feeling overwhelmed in March. Some were feeling scared, some were feeling nervous, unsure, just a lot of emotions, flooded, anxious, and concerned. I'm actually helping out by putting some of those in that Mentimeter so we can actually see this cloud grow.
So what will happen is as you enter your responses, those that are shared common feelings will be larger in print. And those that are smaller or less identified will be smaller, and it will create this figure, which will really give us a sense of how were people feeling at that time. And we have a couple of people behind the scenes helping us tonight. So Diane is kind of watching the cloud. And so as you can see, this is what a word cloud looks like. And so in the center of it, we have some of the words that Angelique was sharing with you about being anxious, confused, overwhelmed. Are there some other ones, Angelique, that really stand out to you?
Yeah, this is a big one. Unaware of the seriousness initially. Befuddled, suspicious. Some folks were numb and helpless and confused. Wow.
All right, well, we'll let that continue to grow and we'll check back on it. And thank you for all of you that put your answers either in the chat box or in the Mentimeter. But I think what was clear is that most of us were feeling either overwhelmed or anxious or concerned, and there was this general sense of an emotional overload. And I think that this all kind of comes together in one word. And if we can go to the next slide, we'll see that change has really been at the cornerstone of everything that's happened. We had to change all our routines. And that word change in itself oftentimes evokes much concern, anxiety, fear within people. And we're going to talk a little bit tonight about how that has impacted us, but then we're going to dive into what does it mean about the brain. So during that time, which has almost been a year, if you can believe it, a lot has changed, and we're aware of the physical things where everybody is required to wear a mask now. Everybody has to have social distancing, and closings have occurred in everything from our schools to our jobs, to recreation, to dining out. All of these things have had a physical change in our environment. But there's also been other changes that we need to think about. How about all of the changes in your brain? The changes that are a result of fear, anxiety, fatigue, stress. And all of us have experienced that over time. And over time, what's happened is it has actually caused changes in our executive function skills. Say what now? Yep, that's my favorite little man. And I will tell you that that's true. We have all had changes in our executive function skills. So yeah, I'm sorry to tell you that, but it's true. So let's break the brain down a little bit tonight. And we're going to talk about it in two parts. We're going to talk about the thinking brain, and then we'll talk about the emotional brain. Let's start with the thinking brain. So in the thinking brain is where all of your conscious thoughts are. You're aware of these processes. This is where you can make decisions, calculations, you can reason through things, you can express yourself in language, and all of that happens in the cortex or in your frontal lobe. And these are things that require thinking on your part. The other part of our brain is our emotional brain. And this is where your emotions, your impulses, your intuition, your instincts, and even your implicit bias is located. And that's kind of where that limbic system resides, which includes your thalamus, your amygdala, your hypothalamus, and your hippocampus. And they all come together where those emotions are in response to the stimuli that's coming in your brain. All right, so we have two parts. Now let's take a look at this. What research says is that your emotional brain is fast. It is 5 times more powerful than your thinking brain. And this is where those irrational, emotional, illogical responses come from when we have either a threat or a fear or anxiety. On your other side is that thinking brain, where all that rational thinking and the logical thinking and problem solving come from, but it's slow. It's 5 times weaker than your emotional brain. So now just think about when you get aroused, it goes to your emotional brain first, and you respond before your thinking brain has a chance to get in the action. So there was a book that was written, and it was called Thinking Fast and Slow. And it was, the author of it is Daniel, I think it's Kahneman. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But what his research showed is that there are 2 systems in your brain. System 1 is the intuitive, emotional brain. And he said the problem with this brain is as soon as you get that emotional response, you respond. But that's oftentimes where your biases are. So when you're making quick decisions, you're making that out of your emotional brain. And so remember, the emotional brain doesn't have all the facts. It has irrational, emotional, and illogical responses when we make quick decisions. On the other hand, he says we have the system 2, and this is your slower, much more deliberate thinking brain. And when we have access to the thinking brain, we think about alternatives, we think about all the facts, we make sure that we're making the best decision. Now think about a decision you made recently. Which side of the brain were you operating out of? Was it your emotional brain or your thinking brain? And sometimes when we respond, particularly to an irritant, whether it be a disruptive child or a barking dog or a spouse who doesn't clean up after themselves, oftentimes that's our emotional brain getting in the way. And if we could just stop and think, we can access our thinking brain and come up with a much better solution.
So when we're thinking about the contrast between that thinking brain and that emotional brain, we kind of think about the actions and the emotions. And when you're thinking about your emotional brain, the first thing that, science tells us is that brains are not built. I'm sorry, that brains are not born, they're built. And so it takes time for us, even as adults, to grow into understanding the 2 sides of our brain, that thinking and that emotional. And so what happens is we all know that when our emotions get really intense and they just move beyond that threshold of just normalcy, we become dysregulated. We are unable to function. We're unable to really access the pieces of the thinking brain that Kelly talked about that help us to form those rational decisions, that help us to really figure out what it is we need to do. How do we move forward without the emotions? Technically, our emotional brains run our thinking brains. Have you ever been in a situation where as soon as it happens, you go into just quick thinking or feeling per se of how to respond? Instead of stopping, taking a moment to really go through the process of the pros, the cons, the consequences, you automatically react because that's, of course, the amygdala lives in that limbic system, and that is part of our emotional brain. So when we think about emotional dysregulation being in our brains, it takes us from the frontal lobe where all of our executive function is housed. So it's kind of like we become stunted like deer in headlights. But instead of just standing still, in most instances, that emotional brain will have us to react instead of to act. We react if someone's yelling, if someone's screaming, if we have just had a loss, if we have just learned March that things are closing automatically. It was, what's going on? What's happening? I'm confused. I don't know, as opposed to let me kind of figure out what's happening. And what happens is when the emotional brain is active, there is a disconnectivity between relating to the thinking brain. So the two areas really have difficulty communicating with each other. Let's go to the next slide. So we want to really figure out how we can really fine tune and sharpen our executive function skills so that we can learn how to move past the irrational thinking, how to move past the behaviors that then we have to backtrack, how to move past being able to thrive in a situation, to be able to prosper through decisions, to be able to flourish even in the midst of stress, in the midst of high intense emotions. Because what happens is when we are managing our emotions, we're learning how to build tolerance for uncomfortable feelings. And all of these things are housed in our emotional brain. Let's move on. So looking at this slide, I'd love for you to just kind of think right now and ask yourself, do you tend to do any of these things? Are you just the perpetual procrastinator and you just don't know why? I'll do it tomorrow. Oh, I'll do it the next day. Are you constantly jumping from one activity to another without finishing? How often do we start something and then the minute something else catches our eye, we jump to it? What about having trouble keeping your workspaces clean? We're all at home now, so we have these home workspaces, which sometimes may double for one end of the couch. Some of us actually have gotten a desk area and moved it into a special place where we can kind of work quietly. But are you able to keep it clean as you would in your workspace, or keep things organized around the house? Are you forgetting to do things that you promised? I don't know how often I promised my daughter I'd do something throughout the day, and then 5 o'clock she comes down the stairs and she's like, what happened to what we were going to do? And automatically I'm like, oh my God, I totally forgot. It slipped my mind. What about being chronically late, even working from home? How many of those meetings are you 5-10 minutes late from because you're doing something else, or you just forget, your phone didn't give you an alarm? Here's a big one. What about losing your cool when people don't behave the way that they should? And think about just where we are in this world with all of our lives being entrenched together under one roof, and trying to manage whether it's your mommy hat, whether it's your relationship hat, or your dad hat, or your work hat, how you're trying to manage all of those things. And so when one little thing happens, you lose your cool because you feel like you're just overwhelmed with all of the weight of all of the hats. And what about when you struggle to come up with a plan B? If plan A doesn't work, you're back to being that deer in the headlights, not knowing how to move forward. And what about this one? I find myself doing this one from time to time, just frittering away my time, even though I know there's work to be done. Sitting at the computer and doing everything except for the one thing that I'm supposed to be doing. I have to work on a PowerPoint. Oh, but I'm going to look at something on the internet, or I have to answer an email, or I'm going to call and make a call, just frittering around knowing that the time is going. I don't know about you, but I tell the truth. Anyone else give me some thumbs up, give me some likes. Am I the only one? There you go. Thanks, Sandy. But think about it. This is what's happening in our emotional brain when we are just juggling so much, which is why we absolutely love the title of this workshop, because we're constantly juggling thoughts, our emotions, our actions. And here we are now really wanting to know, how can I get past this? How can I learn to juggle better? Let's move on.
So Angelique, there was a lot in the chat about people feel, right on that they had 6 out of them, they had 5 out of them, they had 4 out of them. So we're all in this together.
Absolutely. And so this is why we're here tonight. If you're like me and you're struggling with some of these things, what can we do to learn more about our executive function skills and our self-regulation?
You've come to the right place. Let's go on. So what is executive function? At the Children's Guild, we align ourselves with the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University. And this is how they define it. They say that the executive functions are the mental processes that allow you to plan and focus your attention to whatever the detail is, remember instructions, juggle those tasks simultaneously. And they compare it to an air traffic control system at a very busy airport, where there are planes coming in and planes leaving, and there are all kinds of runways that are being reviewed and monitored to make sure that things are going smoothly. And that's exactly what your brain does all day long. It's constantly figuring out where to pay attention, how to filter out distractions, how to prioritize what comes first, setting goals, and making sure that you can control the impulse to do something besides what you're supposed to do. So here's air traffic control. And as you can see from the picture, they're all busy. And part of what their job is to monitor the planes, but there are so many distractions because there's so much chatter that goes on the radios. And there's so much movement, and planes are coming and going, and there's a delay here, and so it's a hold up here and a move forward here, and all of those things that we've experienced when we are the participant on the plane. We can understand now is that as all of this is happening, the same thing's going on in your brain all day long. And those are your executive functions that are helping you or hindering you to get the job done. So if you think about your memory, your ability to focus, your creativity, just your overall ability and capabilities, your ability to pay attention, those are basically everything that you need to get stuff done. And that's your executive functions that we're talking about. So I want you to know, though, that although the executive functions are not, you're not born with them, but you have the capacity to develop them over time. And as an infant, what happens is you are growing and developing in response to your environment, to the stimulation in your environment, to the relationships in your environment, to the language in your environment. And all of that is helping you to develop those skills. And what research has said is that those skills develop all the way through adulthood till about at age 30. However, with neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, we can continue to build our skills. So for those of you that are over 30, myself included, we still have hope. We can still develop our executive function skills. So we're going to dive into them a little bit now. And we follow the Peg Dawson and Richard Greer's approach to executive functions. And they have identified 12: response inhibition, working memory, emotional control, task initiation, sustained attention, planning and prioritizing, organization, time management, flexibility, metacognition, goal-directed persistence, and stress tolerance. And so we're going to look at each of these and think about where our skills are in each of these categories. So at the Children's Guild, we like to break the skills up into 3 buckets. And we break them into those that deal with thoughts, those that deal with emotions, and those that deal with actions. And I just saw in the chat, someone said it sounded like a superpower, and metacognition is definitely a superpower. And we'll unpack that in just a little bit. All right, so let's start with the first bucket. So in this first bucket, what we have thought about is we have grouped together any of those skills that require thinking. And so we have attributed an icon to each of those skill sets as a way of spurring our memory of what exactly that means. So in this bucket, we're going to talk about flexibility, time management, metacognition, planning and prioritizing, and working memory. So all of those skills fall into the thought bucket. Now let's define them. So flexibility is the capacity to think before you act. But what I mean with that is being able to take in information and being able to think about it before you come up with your solution. So it's not a quick emotional response, but it's ability to take information, decide how to use it, and come up with a plan for it. That's flexibility. Metacognition, our superpower, is really thinking about thinking. So it's as if you could take a bird's eye view of what's going on in your brain. It's like self-reflection. So as you're thinking about stuff, you think, wonder why I thought that. And it helps you to think through what might have occurred in terms of prior experiences that you're connecting, and therefore you want to act in that same response. So thinking about your thinking or self-reflection is what we mean by metacognition. So time management is the ability to estimate how much time you need to meet the deadline. And oftentimes this is where people have difficulty, because if you're that person who kind of twitters away their time and then realizes, oh my gosh, I have to meet that deadline, I'm going to miss it, has difficulty estimating time. Or maybe you're the person who says, oh, it's only going to take me 10 minutes to get there, and it really takes 20 minutes. But you think, I'll just drive really, really fast. Well, not really. So some people, when we talk about time management, is figuring out how long do you think it's going to take you, and then making sure you're monitoring your time to get there. So planning and prioritizing is similar, but this is your roadmap of how you're going to get it done. So when you're planning, you're thinking, okay, I've got all these things to get done. I'm going to do this first, this second, and this third. And so some people prioritize and plan based on their least favorite activity first to their most favorite at the end. And some people do it exactly the opposite. But planning and prioritizing is a roadmap to how it works best for you. And then working memory is when we're able to hold information in our brain long enough to perform a task. So when we think about things like directions, so if you give a direction, it's having to hold that in your mind long enough to be able to execute. And this is where we get into trouble a lot of times. So for instance, in schools, sometimes we give kids too many directions. All right, take out your math book, open up to page 52. We're going to start with number 1, but I only want you to do the odd ones, and I want you to show your work, and then I want you to go back and verify how you got your work done and how you came up with that answer. And when you're done, put your paper on the corner of your desk and then get your something out for free time.
Yeah.
And the kid says,
What?
Math?
What?
Because they didn't hold it in their brain long enough. Same thing if you ask directions. And thankfully we have GPS, so we don't have to do this anymore. But it used to be if you had to ask directions, by the time you got to the first corner and they said, take a left and then go a block and turn right, well, now I'm lost, right? That's your working memory. Oftentimes we are the cause of frustration because we overtax a working memory when we don't have that capacity. Think about that next time you're given directions at home, to a coworker, or to our students. All right, so these are our thinking skills, or our thought skills, as we like to call it. I want you to think about, where are your strengths in all of those? Is your strength flexibility, metacognition, time management, planning and prioritizing, or working memory? If you feel like it, you could put it in the chat and kind of share where you think yours are. Metacognition, yes. I love metacognition, thinking about thinking, planning. It depends on whether it's work related, right? Oh, somebody says not time management. And others are saying, yes, time management, planning, flexibility, working memory. So each of us has strengths, and we need to make sure we know what they are and that we can use them. All right, well, thanks for sharing.
And so now let's move to the second bucket. which is the core of pretty much who we are as humans, that emotions bucket. And there are two pieces that fall in that bucket, and that's our emotional control and our stress tolerance. So let's look at those. So when we think about our emotional control, that aspect is it's our ability to manage our emotions. And that's such an important part in building tolerance, in building resilience, and even building resistance to some of the things that are happening within us and around us. Because if we're able to manage our emotions, we'll then be able to complete tasks. You'll be able to control your behaviors and direct them. Think about, let's just take it even to our students in the classroom. Without that emotional control, students are constantly allowing their amygdalas to be hijacked. And for those who have been with us in some of our workshops, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They're unable to control the emotions. They're unable to understand that sharing is an impulse control. And so I have to wait until my classmate passes me the ball instead of just grabbing it. Or if someone says something that's mean, my control will tell me to let the teacher know, as opposed to yelling at them, spitting on them. Let's just be realistic, hitting them. Again, your emotions are what help you to complete the tasks. They would help you to control and direct your behavior. Controlling and directing are two very different things. Controlling could mean stopping, controlling could mean starting, but directing means where am I sending this particular behavior and how is it going to land? So it's really a very big part of what we're talking about, especially how we're learning right now to build these aspects into our brains, to build this level of functionality so that we can move forward, and thinking about that inhibitory control and being able to stop. Your brain being able to tell you that I shouldn't do this right now, or I shouldn't react in this way. And your impulsivity for our kids. But guess what? Even some of us as adults, we have impulsivity where we just jump to it. Something happens and we don't even think about the ramifications. We don't think about where our words are going to land, how our actions are going to land. And so that's a good question. How do we build these skills? This is what we're going to talk about in depth tonight, because one of the ways that we do that, we're going to share some of those tools. But then when it talks about the stress tolerance, let's be real. We are living in a consistently stressful environment as a result of this pandemic. Even if things are going fairly well in our personal lives, some of us have experienced significant loss over the last year. Some of us have been challenged in our health over the last year. We've watched others suffer. Some of us have lost jobs, some financial losses. There's just been a lot. So we are living in a consistent state of just stressful situations. So the part of that emotions bucket that is stress tolerance really, really allows us to thrive and to prosper, even in a stressful situation. Look at the analogy of just where we are right now. I'll use Maryland as the example, and it was so exciting to see so many states flying through the chat. And so we're really glad you're with us. But just last week, everything was covered with snow. Everything was just snow covered, and you couldn't see anything green other than the trees. And so this morning when I go out to take the dog out, all the snow is melted and all I see is the grass, and it's still green and maybe very, very moist, but it's still green and it's thriving even in the stressful situation of being impacted by the snow. And so kind of think of it the same way with our brains. We are walking through stressful situations and they are what is impacting us. But we're learning how to cope even with the things that are impacting us, the uncertainty and the change and the performance demands, so that as we continue to grow and as we really implement specific strategies to help enhance this particular part of our executive function skills, we will thrive. We will look forward to the snow melting. We'll look forward to the spring. We'll look forward to the time when we can go out and we can hug a friend and we can sit across a restaurant without us all only being able to see each other's eyes. We'll have that capacity to get through this time knowing that this too shall pass. Next slide. So I'm wondering, back to the chat or not, what are your emotional strengths? Where do you feel the strongest in this area? Could it be your emotional control, being able to, have that inhibitory control where you're able to respond effectively, appropriately, and not feel like you're always going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing? Or are you someone who really has that stress tolerance that you're able, yes, this has been a tough time with the pandemic, but hey, I'm okay. I've gone through some things. I've lost some people. And it looks like a lot of us have that stress tolerance strength, which is amazing. And I applaud you. And then we have some that have the emotional control. Oh, and we even have a few rock stars who are managing both. Kudos
Like we
to
have
you.
a little bit of everything there, Angie.
Yeah. Awesome.
All right. Let's go on to our last bucket. So this is our action bucket, and this includes the doing. And some of these we've talked about a little bit, but let's refine how we think about it. So the first one that we're going to talk about is the organization. And this is you being able to create and maintain a system of how you keep track of information and your materials. These are kind of the systems and the rituals you create, whether it's where you put your keys every night, to how you charge your phone, to how you set up your classroom. These are the organizational strategies that you develop, you implement, and hopefully they help you to get through the daily tasks from day to day. The goal-directed persistence is that ability to follow through to completion. So this is sometimes where we have difficulty. Typically at the beginning of the year, everybody sets a New Year resolution and they set these goals. Research says by January 8th, that goal is no longer viable. Most of us have drifted away from it. So when you think about setting your goals, and as you're helping students set goals or your own children, think about small goals that are easily achievable to get that sense of completion. If you set a lofty goal, what happens is we frequently get distracted and we get off track. And in our world today with so much uncertainty, it's hard to set goals and stay on track because that target keeps moving for us. So with this one, my recommendation is as you're thinking about your goal directed and your persistence, set small goals because that target's moving and we want to feel successful. All right, so these are two of my favorite. Response inhibition is the ability to stop before you say it or before you do it. This is the ability to control that impulse. And as Angelique was talking about, is when we just go ahead and do it. And then we stop and think, oh, I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have done that. This is that, hindsight is 2020. And most of us know people who have difficulty with this. This is the person in the group who blurts out something and you're like, I can't believe they just said that. Do they understand where they are? Because that's what happens with response inhibition. And younger children, they do it all the time. They say things in the grocery store or when you're out in public and you think, oh my gosh, people are going to think I'm horrible because they don't have this skill set. But as adults, we really need to know how to stop, think about what we want to say, consider the social context before it comes out. For many, this is a really hard skill. The next one is task initiation. And this is being able to start that project without a lot of procrastination. So this is where people tend to get overwhelmed. If there's a large task ahead of them, they get overwhelmed and they just never can get started because it's too big. It's like eating the elephant instead of taking one bite at a time. So when I think of this, I oftentimes think of like projects that I have, and I have a terrible time getting started, particularly if it's a writing project. And so I have the cleanest house in town when I have a writing project, because I do everything else. My house is immaculate because I'm procrastinating because I don't want to write it. So task initiation, if we could break those tasks down into small steps, we're much more likely to get those done. And our last one in this area is called sustained attention. And this is the ability to manage your emotions so that you can achieve your goals, complete your task, and control and direct your behavior. So a lot of times when we talk about our children, we talk about teaching them how to sustain attention to a task. Because many times those distractions that are coming and going make them off task. And so particularly now in a virtual world where their family's all around them and you might have the dog barking or the cat's climbing up on you or mom or dad walks in, or there's lots of distractions. And so being able to sustain your attention really means having that capacity to focus and avoid distractions. We'll talk about some strategies of how to do that. I see there are other people who don't like writing either. Or a chatty parrot. So, all right, so let's think about these skills. These are our action skills. Where are your strengths? Are they in organization? Are they in your goal-directed persistence, response inhibition, task initiation, or sustained attention? So it sounds like some people are very well organized. That's great. Response inhibition, that's wonderful. We need that in society. Therapy dogs, wow, that's great. All right, so it's wonderful to see that you're able to start connecting with where your strengths are and understanding what executive function really is all about. So let's take a look now at where this comes from. And so this is actually one of the books that I use frequently when I'm training, which is Smart But Scattered, and it is by Peg Dawson. And what she talks about is how do we develop these skills in everyday work. What you have on your screen is also the website that includes the executive function questionnaire. And this particular address will take you to a very comprehensive view of the questionnaire. So here's page 1 of it. It's simple to do. You can do it for yourself, and you're going to rate an item based on either strongly disagree to strongly agree. And it's simple things like, I don't jump to conclusions. Well, sometimes I do. And so you give yourself a score. And at the end of it, it helps you tabulate your score to figure out where your strengths are. And then it gives you a chart that helps you figure out if these are not your strengths, how do you improve them? So it gives you some suggestions of how you can help yourself. There's also questionnaires for children. So they have one for preschool, primary, middle school, and high school. So if you get a chance, go on, take it. It's quick and easy, and it's a great way to learn about your own executive function skills.
And just to kind of add on to Kelly, for those who are asking about different age levels, and we did have a question about middle school in terms of helping to build those executive functioning skills. The Dawson package for Smart and Scattered, not only does she have for the little kiddos, she has for teens, she has for adolescents, she has for young adults, and there are even some skills for those of us who are up in age. We won't say the number, but she definitely has a book for each age level, which will also give you some idea into just how to really fine tune those executive functioning skills at any age. And so we do have this placemat available as part of tonight's package. We've handcrafted all of the 3 buckets and put them in one place so that you'll be able to have them as a reference to be able to really understand them better, figure out your strengths as well as your areas for improvement, and use this even in your classrooms. So this will be a part of the offering for tonight's package.
And I know in the chat, there was just a question about how you teach this. And what you'll find out as we move along is we will be offering upcoming webinars on how to teach and strategies you can use for each and every one of these. So that will be coming up in our next couple of webinars.
And someone asked about whether executive functioning is a result of having ADHD. Actually, the deficit in certain areas of your executive functioning could result in a disorder, like a learning disorder like ADHD.
Exactly. So what we actually have found out tonight is that our frontal lobes, which is where our executive function skills are located, are considered the home of your personality. It's what makes you, you. So now what? How do we build our executive function skill sets? Oh, wrong way, Diane. All right, so I'm going to introduce you to a friend. We're going to watch this quick video, and we're going to learn about this little boy, and then we're going to talk for a moment. So sit back, it's a quick video.
I have a lot of memories from when I was a child. One that's always stuck out to me, though, was when I was about 10 years old, and I was in school, and I struggled. And I didn't struggle with English, math, or science. I struggled holding still. And I would try to listen and focus and process ideas, but I couldn't help myself. Then, to be honest, I would sit there and then I would just start tapping. And the students in the class would look at me and they'd say, "Hey, stop tapping." A lot of the time, I didn't even realize I was doing it. And then eventually even the teachers got after me and they would yell at me and they'd say, "Clint, you have to stop tapping." It got so bad that I got sent to the principal's office for tapping. And he said to me, "Okay, maybe when you go back to class, just try sitting on your hands." And so I did. I went back to class, and when I felt myself starting to tap, I did this. I sat on my hands. And that worked for about 5 seconds. One time I was tapping in class, and my teacher, Mr. Jensen, he looked at me and he yelled. And he said, "Clint, stay after class." And I thought to myself, this is it. I am done. Now, I've always been the type of person that believes that a single moment in time can change a person's life. And this was one of those moments for me. And I will never forget it. And so I was sitting there with Mr. Jensen and an empty classroom. And he walked past me and he sat next to his desk and he said, "Clint, come here. I want to talk to you." And as he looked me right in the eye, he said, "Now, I need you to know something. You're not in trouble. But I do have just one question that I have to ask you." And he asked, he said, "Have you ever thought about playing the drums?" And in that moment, Mr. Jensen, he leaned back and he opened the top drawer of his desk. And he reached in and he pulled out my very first pair of drumsticks. And he held them in his hands and he looked at me and he said, "Hey, Clint, you're not a problem. I think you're a drummer." And from that moment on, I've never put those sticks down. I've toured, recorded, and played drums all over the world. My whole college education was paid for with drumsticks in my hand. Just because of a single moment in time when somebody believed in me and he saw something in me that I didn't even see within myself. And from that moment, I learned that there's a difference between being the best in the world and being the best for the world.
So I see from the chat, some of you have seen this, and thankfully, we have a lot of Mr. Jensens in our world who are able to help us see beyond the behavior and look at the strength underneath.
I love how impactful a simple video can be. And there's good news. The fact, one, that you're affected means that everyone on this line came here tonight because you want to be great for the world. And guess what? Each of us has those strengths. And sometimes We just have to really, really see one another. Teachers in the classroom, really see your students. Don't just be there with them, but be there with them. We can see what one person might think is a deficit and help them grow into an amazing strength if we are just finding ways to allow their unique talents to shine and not see everything as a problem behavior, but instead let's figure out how we can make lemonade out of lemons, per se. Good news, we can be the change that the world needs to see. Next slide. Like I said, and I'll keep saying it, great brains are built, they are not born. So we always have the capacity to help grow our executive function skills. It takes time, it takes patience, it takes effort. It takes for us to really want it, not only for ourselves, but for the children and the families that we serve as well. Kaboom, zap. Because guess what? When you improve those skills, you are beginning to develop those other skills that you need, that self-regulation, and ultimately that internal resource that you need to manage life's challenges. This is all about inspiration tonight. Bang, pow. I feel like we're watching an episode of Batman. So what we want you to do is come back. This was just a taste. This was actually the appetizer to our very extravagant 4-course meal. We wanted to lay out and get your appetites ready for really learning about executive functioning skills. So what we're going to be doing in the upcoming months, our workshops, we're going to break down several of those specific executive function skills and give you the tools on how to grow that particular area. So keep coming back. This is only the beginning. Pow, we've got a lot more to learn. Kel?
So our world changed on March 13th, 2020. Societal uncertainties have resulted in much anxiety, fatigue, frustration for all of us. And as a result, our emotions have intensified, resulting in dysregulation. Our ability to think rationally and to perform at our best has been compromised. So too is true of the children that will be coming back to our classrooms.
We want you to leave with an important message. And it's one that we've echoed more than once, because sometimes things need to be said more than once for us to really hear them and know that it is all for okay for us. The inability to focus and produce our best work during this pandemic, it is expected. We want you to realize that we are all trying to reach our same level of greatness, but this pandemic is making it hard, and you're allowed to give yourself some grace, because guess what? It's not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign that you are incompetent or you cannot rise to the occasion of doing your job because of the stress, but guess what? It is simply part of the human condition. Give yourself some grace.
Being strong means juggling sacrifices while still pushing for progress. And each and every one of you that's here tonight has made tremendous sacrifice, whether it's for your family, your students, your neighbors, your job. You've all made sacrifices. And the good news is we're making progress. So this has been a long journey, but there is a light at the end of this tunnel. We will prevail by strengthening our executive functions, practicing patience, and being grateful for getting to this point in our journey together.
We are so appreciative that you all took the time this evening to join us. We definitely hope that you will come back next month and the month after that and the month after that. And just to let you know that there are additional free resources in addition to this particular workshop and all of the materials that will go along with it that will be available on our website, which is childrenskill.org/webinars. This recording should be available within 7 to 10 days, but you'll also be receiving notification and you can go ahead and download it and enjoy it. And as always, if you have any questions, You can reach out to us at info@transed.org and keep your head up. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for joining us tonight.
I've been trying to survive.